Hello? Works?
Hello? That work? A little bit, okay. Cool. Later. The pit town of Nantes, England, seems grafted with a no-color December monochrome. The pit town of Nantes, better? Okay, cool. It is an atmospheric tone, only imbued in the North Pennine, 500 meters above sea level. Skies are dense and vaporous, like a smoke that is drifted over from Durham's valleys, scolding over from Durham's factories that scold in the valley below.
Oh? Hello? Hello? Over 9 years?
screen.
So, did anything come up on the main screen?
So it said sync.
And was there any tick?
Then there was a little tick. Yeah, there was a little tick.
Yeah, so now you've synced that microphone up with that receiver.
Mhm.
Okay, so now if you unmute that microphone, you should not get wireless interference.
Right. Okay. Try that.
Let's try that out on that first microphone.
Okay. Hello? Hello? Check, 1, 2. Okay. So so then do I need to do the same thing for the other mic? Fine, okay.
Yeah. So all that is sometimes what will happen is there's loads of different frequencies being used in the area. Okay. And sometimes with the wireless microphones, someone might use your frequency
Yeah.
by accident.
Yeah, I'm mic 2. Hang on. Check. Check. Check 1, 2. Oh, a lot of feedback, but it is now on.
Okay, so I think probably what somebody's done is they've plugged. Can you show me where it's plugged into the wall?
The actual AV rack.
Yeah, that bit. Yeah. The cable that goes into the mixer.
You mean that?
It's Control L, isn't it?
Yes.
And then you should be able to click through with the mouse, which will be on the table.
On the computer? Yep.
So where is that coming in now?
It's coming in on mic 2.
And then
Okay.
I'll escape.
So
and then
if you
be able to carry on with the
change that, that's really weird. Okay, if that's the case, then go through on your channel and just copy and paste all of the settings that you had on the previous microphone.
Wait, sorry, Will, say that to me again.
Or, actually, even better, if you unplug that microphone from where it is and plug it into... Has anyone unplugged or plugged that in anywhere else?
No.
No, that's so weird.
Everything, no one's unplugged or plugged anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, look, so are you getting volume at all from it now?
I'm getting volume, but a lot of feedback.
Right, okay, fine. So, double check against mic 1 that all the settings are pretty much the same.
How, so, this is mic 1, this is mic 2, so this is
So the
slightly
gain is
higher.
obviously- Yeah, so bring that down to 5. If you double click and put that as 5.
Wait. Oh my god. Oh, what? Yep.
the live stream.
And then the other element is obviously, I can see that if you look at the EQ,
Uh-huh.
so if you go to EQ, yeah, and then just make sure that that's similar to what it is on
Wait,
channel.
check on the right one.
So that's on lapel at the moment.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
No, because
So
it's
just
mic
make
coming
sure
out
that
of mic 2.
Everything on channel mic 1 matches mic 2, basically. You should be okay.
Okay, so let me look at mic 1's EQ.
If we can just have one mic working at this point.
But that's what I'm trying to do.
Only one.
That's what I'm trying to do, yeah. So mic 2 EQ. They're like, so this is mic 1's EQ, this is mic 2's EQ.
Yeah, so just move that bass one up.
This one.
To the right, yeah. To the right, the other way. Yeah, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, a little bit more. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Great.
And now I should try it to see if I get any
Yeah, just
feedback.
try it, see if that's any better.
Let me bring it to Unity. Check. Check, check, 1, 2. Check, 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 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. Still feedback.
That's really odd. Maybe just bring the gain down a little bit on it.
So it's at 5. Oh no, yeah, it's at 5 currently. So it's like a 4.
Bring it all the way down. Like just to 0.
Yeah.
Then push your volume up a bit on the actual microphone. Keep talking into the microphone whilst you do it.
Check, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2. Loads of feedback.
Right, okay. That might just be something to do with the
Wait, say that again, what?
On the microphone, are you on the microphone and the receiver? Are you on channel 1 both?
Yeah.
Oh wait, hang on. Wait, no, it's on two.
There you go, that's your problem. Try again.
Right. Check, check 1 2. Check, check 1 2. Check, check 1 2. Check, check 1 2. Check. Still feedback.
And if you unplug that microphone and plug it into the next channel along, where does that?
Check, check 1 2. Check. Oh, wait, that's wrong. Check, check 1 2. Check, check 1 2. Check, check 1 2. Check, check. Test, test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3 4. Hello, check. Okay, no, not as much feedback. Hello. Check 1 3. Check 1 2. Check 1 5. Yeah. Okay.
Now just remember, you can adjust the EQ on that channel
Yeah.
as before, yeah? So if you're getting a lot of bass, then pull the bass out.
Check. Check 1 2. Check, check 1 2. Check 1 2 3 4. Yeah. It's a bit bassy. So then which?
So on channel 3, that low cut there, you just want to move that up.
Which one? This one?
No, the low cut where it's already going down. Yeah, that one. So if you hold the circle and move that to the right.
To the right.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, so you're cutting the bass.
Okay.
So talking to the microphone, make sure you're getting good sound.
Whilst I'm cutting. Okay. Check. Check 1 2. Check 2 3 4. Check. Yeah. Okay. That sounds less.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool.
Check.
And then the last thing you need to do is just obviously you need to make sure that lapel microphone is synced.
Yes. Yeah. The other one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Let me know if you get any issues again.
Will do. Thanks, Will. Bye.
No worries. Talk to you in a bit.
Check. Check 1 2. Check. Check 1 2. Check 1 2 3 4. Check. Testing. Testing. Cool. Okay. Check. Test. Test. Cool. Check, check.
are, however, not completely excised of metal, and they leach into regional waters across the northeast of England. Within the old smelting mill, lead levels in the soil reach up to 134,000 milligrams per kilo, 2,000 times the Environmental Agency safety limit. The northeast is haunted by these colonial violences. Lead particles created during the colonial operation of the mine now accumulate far along the River Nent, in soils, crops, and bodies. Toxicity overspills the physical and temporal bounding of the land, conditioning multi-species communities beyond the supposed end of extraction. Whether cooking, bathing, swimming, drinking, lead infiltrates through bodies as it is ingested, metal moves along calcic pathways into the gut before mineralizing in bones, teeth, and nerve cells. With a 60-year cellular half-life, skeletons lose density over time as lead progressively replaces calcium, echoing its formation in limestone 290 million years ago. And so, veins shift into veins. As such, osteoporosis rates in Nenthead are 3 times higher than the national average. In time, as metal particles fuse to neural pathways, overrunning their banks like the River Nent, they erode memories. Northern bodies have become metabolized by metal. Lead suffuses my body too. I grew up in the area and accumulated metal from conception to the present. Drinking, swimming, dissolving, washing, eating, inebriating, osmosing, and umbilically exchanging, lead is also alloyed to my neurons. Some bodies, however, defy this extractive toxicity. Deadly to most more than humans, the purple mountain pansy flourishes on lead-inundated soils. It exists in a metallic symbiosis with the rhizosphere, where lead saturates its roots and stem before accruing in the epidermal cells of growing buds. Pigments in the petals form a chemical architecture here, embracing lead molecules in a non-toxic assemblage that let the flower to flourish. These processes also turn the pansies purple. And across the landscape, toxicity can be read with these violet signs, whose intensity increases with metal concentration. Metallic metabolism within the plant disobeys the toxicity of lead that's conditioned so many people for so many years. The deathly residue of extraction, lead particles once considered waste, does not progress on its continuum of wasting bodies. Instead, pansy and pollutant create a resilient and queer entanglement, a lead-loving flower that flourishes beyond the supposed end of the mine's productive life. Through the pansy, contamination becomes rather a companion. And around this flower, other stories of defiance grow. Within the 1984-85 miners' strike, as Margaret Thatcher and a Conservative government removed benefits for striking families, hunger was weaponized to enforce a return to extraction. In an act of collective resistance, various spaces across Nenthead were reappropriated by women as a purple ecology of soup kitchens and community halls. In these common sites, pansies, that witches and wise women once shared as medicine across the peatlands fissured by the mine, were served as restorative broths. Ingested, the antioxidants harbored in the petals help reduce the absorption of lead in the body for striking miners and their families. This highly local solidarity was nourished across oft-considered boundaries. Many of the ingredients for these restorative soups were sponsored by queer activist groups, such as Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, organizing Pits and Perverts parties in London, from which this talk takes its title. Such events represented a form of deterritorialized kinship that was formed between the urban centers of the south and the mine town peripheries in the north. This intersectional solidarity, entwined with projections for living within mining communities, were conserved, reconsidered, and celebrated every year in the Durham Miners Gala. On the second Saturday of July, residents processed with iconographic banners, fabric instruments remade each year to project collective futures and dreams of how to live in their respective villages. For 12 hours from Nenthead to Durham, the village dreamed together across landscapes inundated with lead. The banners that accompany villages through the Durham Miners Gala are the public representations of the communities that follow in their wake. The 2x2 meter tapestries, its detailing, foliation, colors, adages, and illustrations materialize collective aspirations of the town. Originating as trade union banners, with symbols ordered from a book of arts and crafts stencils, the banners have developed their own codes over the many decades of the meet. Across the gala, fabrics typically depict a large central icon, seen here, framed by a foliated border. However, Nant Head is not paraded since 1984, when its banners were torn by police on the picket line and the mine closed. Today, this ripped fabric sits in a retired miner's living room next to a portrait of Mabel Duke, a local suffragette nicknamed Pansy by Emmeline Pankhurst. In 2024, on the four-decade anniversary of the last time Nant Head paraded to Durham, I imagined with the village a series of 10 new banners. They were initially set to describe and provide testimony to the increasing levels of lead pollution experienced throughout the area. Yet, over the course of the year of making, drawing, meeting, and walking, these significant fabrics became something far richer and more complicated. They became a series of documents that delineate at once the saturation of metal, its milligrams, and microscopic violences, but at the same time interweaving this with the saturation of resistance, joy, and flourishing that this isolated village embodies in far greater concentration than the lead it once mined. The 10 new banners for Nant Head allude to the structure of the more traditional mining ones, providing a series of square tapestries articulated in the proportions of the original torn fabric. The depictions, however, shift across many scales and temporalities entangled by the processes of extraction. Drawn collectively with residents over a period of a year in layers of charcoal, acetone print, and pansy dyes, the fabrics are embodied with both metal and time, existing and representing a landscape where millennia, the formation of lead and limestone, and millisecond, the movement of lead into flower petals, exist at once. The borders of the new banners are typically more evidential than the historic precedents. Some are made from squares of fabric treated here with sodium rhodozonate solution, a chemical used to test for the presence of lead in forensic bullet analysis, before being submerged weekly throughout 2023 at a single site in a stream that cuts through the spoil mounds. The deeper pink tones indicate higher lead concentrations and the weaker ones less. Alongside this, the edges of each square were appliqued with corresponding pH test strips taken at the same location at the same time across the same year. Together, they form a material witness and a visual calendar of lead saturation flowing throughout the stream and out into the surrounding landscape over the whole of 2023. Others hold copies of medical records, x-rays, and also pansies, with squares here dyed with collected flowers that provide a key to the levels of lead in the ground across the northeast with their purple hue. And within these borders, the central portal displays spatial aspirations and histories rendered in layers of charcoal and acetone print. Here, visions of collective life, shaped by mutual care, environmental repair, and rooting in the purple mountain pansy, reclaim post-industrial land to flourish with joy instead of extraction. These sentiments move out of the fabric surfaces and into the town through the preparation of the banners too, as the intensely communal preparations for the gala continue the spatial history of defiance in Nant Head. The fabrics were produced together, drawing, sewing, stitching, printing, alongside a wider ecology of dinners, band practices, rehearsals, and walks. Through these repeated processes, the spatial subversions of the year-long strike, the occupation of public space, the rerouting of daily rhythms around communal care, and the repurposing of industrial infrastructure for collective sustenance are reenacted and preserved across the village year upon year. Meanwhile, the community-produced fabrics become layered with collective consciousness of the town, to be remade each year as they were decades ago into a palimpsest to project aspirations of life within a terrain of constant change and pollution. They aspire to a social geology, a way of sedimenting memory, holding contradiction, and tracing how bodies, minerals, and histories remain entangled within and resist toxic grounds. Through this collective nature, drawing can operate in Endhead as a slow reparative gesture, refiguring Pluto landscapes not via erasure or removal, but through presence, listening, and laid acts of care. I think that's the end, hopefully. Cool. Yeah, thank you very much. Are we doing questions or just going?
Hi everyone, thank you Max for that really incredible presentation. We're going to move on to our second presenter, who is Joanne Berry-Frith. So as well as conducting practice-based research, Joanne exhibits regularly throughout the country and internationally with pieces in the Victoria and Albert Museum, Arts Council England Collections and Nottingham University Medical Schools. Joanne's project Hijacking Natural Systems was nominated by Nottingham University for the Thames Higher Education Award and cited by the Wellcome Trust as an exemplar of a successful arts and engagement project. Also, Joanne's artwork was featured in the BBC4 TV series The Beauty of Anatomy. Joanne's presentation is entitled A Framework for Action and Reflection, Using Play to Understand Relationships Between Art Practice and Life Science. So I'll hand over to Joanne.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm trying to do this. I'm holding this and holding my computer at the same time, so forgive me if it goes a bit belly up. Right. So, right to the top. Okay. So, over a 9-year period, I conducted 3 separate art projects at the University of Nottingham, Compare Centre, the Natural History Museum in London, and Malmo and Gothenburg universities. In each art project, I collaborated with scientists to challenge microscopy techniques such as confocal microscopy, super-resolution microscopy, scanning electron microscopy, and multiphoton microscopy. These different projects led to novel imaging methods and the redefinition of protocols, the creation of new visual representations, and the creation of unique data sets. I focus on advanced imaging and microscopy as a research tool in order to enrich my arts practice. And this study that I've been doing over a very long number of years shows how a play-based approach to art science collaboration fosters innovation and unorthodox problem solving. And I'm focusing on the interpretive and critical aspects of art. And from that, I gathered technological, ethnographic, dialogic, practice-based and process-led data from the 3 projects. And by integrating imaging technologies with artistic methods, the study highlights how play creates creative interaction, enhancing both artistic and scientific understanding. Right, so let's just move this on. So, my research questions were based on my intuitive use of play in my art practice, and my research questions were formed as follows. How can I use the philosophy of play to understand the value and role of play-based art practices while working along scientists in the lab? How can gathering diverse qualitative and quantitative data from scientific research in the lab enhance and extend my knowledge and skills as an artist? And how could drawing practice disrupt scientific image conventions in a mutually beneficial way to advance art and science practice? And how could an artist navigate and communicate alternative approaches to science's use of advanced imaging and microscopy, and what insights could scientists gain from this, informed by philosophical theories of play and technology? And my aims were to contribute to art-science interdisciplinary collaboration, to validate the use of structured play for art-science collaboration, and to identify the significance of the artist embedded with the scientific lab for navigating and communicating alternative approaches to science, and through this conduct a reflective engagement in life sciences use of advanced imaging and microscopy based on the philosophical theories of play and technology. So, to understand the value and role of play-based art practices, I have drawn on both philosophies of play by Calwa, Huizinga, Winnicott, Gadamer, and to a degree technological philosophy to inform my approach. I've taken a hermeneutic approach, underscoring the importance of interpretation in understanding the meaning of all actions fundamental to collaboration in the lab, as well as activities in the art studio, and through interaction via dissemination. So I examined how particular meaning can be woven into a rich description of the phenomena as a whole. And on this side is my research framework, and there were 4 different stages. It's very practical, but my whole intention was to activate play by working as a conduit, by using role play, mimicry, using participatory action research, playful conversational discourse, being embedded and involved in scientific procedure, documenting all activities, making art, dissemination, and reflection. And this was a cyclical reflective process, so one cycle of practice fed into the next cycle of practice. Right, Project 1 at the University Centre for Membrane Proteins and Receptors at Compare. I adopted a play-based approach to challenge conventional confocal, light, and super-resolution microscopy techniques to reveal aesthetic imaging not previously explored. This led to customized experiments, speculative testing of cell signaling protocols, and enhanced data processing to capture material modifications observed in the lab. And my artistic outcomes were shared at Compare at their scientific conferences in 2017 and 2018. And I developed an adaptive software experimental model which reframed my interdisciplinary understanding and extended the imaging protocols of myself and scientists. These figures are examples of light microscopy experiments taken in the histology lab. I worked independently, which led to frequent interactions where researchers would ask, "Are you the artist?" or comment on the fusion of art and science, sparking new conversations within the labs. As I immersed myself further in the scientific environment, my training deepened, my understanding of scientific methods, and refined my imaging techniques. Over time, I began to view scientific imaging not just as a technical tool, but as a powerful medium for visualization. Over an extended period of time, I encouraged my longtime collaborator, Robert Marcus, to experiment with various visualization techniques. He set up super resolution and confocal microscopic experiments for my observation. He taught me microscopy techniques and allowed me to observe his work both independently and in collaboration with other scientists. He provided invaluable data that significantly shaped my research. I encouraged him to try out wide-ranging visualization techniques, and together we explored imaging data which could become both scientific evidence and creative material. So Marcus was committed to our collaborative approach, which deepened both his and my understanding of optical visualization techniques. He developed customized protocols tailored to my research needs. For instance, he demonstrated Brownian motion by combining an algae culture with a bacterium labeled with O, dye, and DNA, allowing me to observe the microscopic structures of algae and the constant motion of molecules in liquids. In my laboratory notebook, I recorded that the motion resembled a luminous stream of light, highlighting the dynamic nature of the macroscopic world. A major insight for me was the concept of pixelation, realizing that what appears as a cell or structure is fundamentally a grid of digital information. Pixelation is an important consideration of the scientific visualization process. The notion that the sophisticated biological, formations as seen on screen are composed of pixel data captivated me. The experience of seeing the laser scan across a plane of interest while the complete picture was obtained pixel by pixel and line by line left an impression, and it became an important method of how I constructed my drawings. And my approach is framed by Bruno Latour's theory on the interconnectedness of human and non-human phenomena. Actor network theory influenced my approach by encouraging me to explore a network of invisible connections among various actants, including humans, technologies, and image data, emphasizing the interplay between human and non-human mediation. Project 2 took place at the Natural History Museum's Imaging and Analysis Centre. I was only one of 5 artists to conduct research there in about 10 years, working with Dr. Alex Ball using scanning electron microscope. Our collaboration involved what I call two-way instructional play. We exchanged expertise as equals, and together we pushed SEM to its optical limits, creating data sets that challenge conventional imaging rules. Because of this strikingly low number of artists, and this rarity of artists going into this lab, it highlights the limited access artists, designers have to scientific environments, raising critical questions about how such spaces are structured, who they are for, and what forms of knowledge are privileged. My work at the Natural History Museum aimed to interrogate these boundaries and advocate for more porous interdisciplinary approaches to research. Because I am interested in understanding how my practice would be impacted by collaborating with a microscopist, interacting with SEM technology, and following empirical scientific procedure. It was interesting to note that Ball was insistently precise when obtaining image data, but as we worked together, a process of two-way instructional play developed, and we focused on creating novel data sets by combining our expertise, examining maximum and minimum magnification at various angles, focal points, and resolutions. Through independent experimentation, I was able to push SEM limits to its optical limits. Well, my thoughts about optical limits, challenging imaging conventions to explore complex microstructures. Techniques I developed included visual aberrations, capturing bright glowing spots that added unexpected depth, dynamic imaging, moving the stage during active electron charging, creating beam drift and double exposures, multifocal framing, composing images with 3 focal points, and unique formations. I was interested in capturing malformed structures, calcareous attachments, and other anomalies. Techniques like beam drift and multifocal framing transform technical errors into aesthetic choices. This slide is an example of an unusual section of the stub, which is out of focus, discordant and lacking detail, which Ball and I agreed was interesting. So collaboration enabled us to participate in deep discussions about scientific picture acquisition, and from this, our differing perspectives on empirical and non-empirical representations came to light. This type of discussion could be regarded as an example how visual communication can be strengthened by inquiry and instructive engagement. Art Project 3 in Malmö and Gothenburg. In this study, I examined the effectiveness of skin treatments and the depth to which skin penetrates skin. Drawing upon the findings from Art Projects 1 and 2, I adopted a performative approach, immersing myself in the role of a scientist. I wore a white lab coat and learned to complete all skin preparation procedures, fully engaging in the scientific process. Simultaneously, I documented all activities for film, photography and notes in my lab book. One advancement in my exploration of play in this study was my examination of mimicry as an element of role play. For instance, I mimic my collaborator's behaviour during training to prepare skin for imaging, aiming to gain insight into her process-driven practices, such as her body language and timing of experiments. By replicating her actions, I sought to align myself with her professional expertise and create the impression of being a competent scientist. We employed multiphoton microscopy, a laser scanning confocal microscope that combines 2 or more photons to produce a high-resolution, 3-dimensional data of microscopic material. Through this experience, I gained a comprehensive understanding of this technology, learning how it provides a non-linear optical effect that allows for the creation of 3-dimensional images. In the second cycle of my practice, it was about my explorative creative practice, and the scientific computer lab became a space for experimental data processing, a practice unfamiliar to my collaborators. It included collaborative two-way play in the scientific computer lab. I collaborated, for example, closely with Fernandez Rodriguez, a specialist in scientific visualization, and together we employed a speculative yet calculated approach to testing Zeiss software tools, aiming to explore the skin data obtained from the imaging lab in a more exploratory and non-traditional manner. The software and advanced imaging tools I use not only shape my creative process, but also redefine my understanding of what my artwork could be. These tools expanded the possibilities of visual expression, allowing me to explore new dimensions in my practice. I discovered how scientific methods could serve as a catalyst for artistic innovation, prompting me to rethink my relationship between art, technology, and my perception. The drawings created during this research served as a counterpoint to scientists' distinct methods of representing data. They are a response to technical non-style of drawing and to mechanical objectivity. In stark contrast, my drawings depict a surface-based analysis of data, captured beyond vision and rendered as a computer graphic, which is on reflection a counterintuitive method of capturing and evidencing information. This is a cardiomyocyte, and I was interested in creating its pixelated structure, which was mapped over a long period of time using different stroke weights on the computer. So my process of drawing involved iterative play, zooming, offsetting, layering, colour and line to reveal how technology mediates our perception of the biological world. I wanted to make imperfect replications of human stem cells derived cardiomyocytes. I asked myself why was it important to develop a laborious method of tracing zoomed-in pixel detail illuminated on screen. It was a time-consuming, paradoxical method of drawing, yet I recognised the drawings I made were subtly remapping complexity. The drawings are exemplars of play and creativity, and they're imbued with playfulness. I heavily invested in the creative process of drawing, observation, selection and action in order to illuminate the potential of play to generate knowledge. The creative and intellectual game I played as I constructed digital drawings was immersive and cyclical. Through praxis, I was able to comprehend the mediating role of technology and how components arise as a result of the distinct remapping process. It is a practical example of how I gained a deeper understanding of how computer technology was shaping my experience of drawing as human and non-human activity connected, and from it I gained tacit knowledge. The first drawing, that one there, presents a cross-section of skin with a hair follicle, where I focused on reconstructing the surface by systematically remapping pixel data. The boundaries of the perceptual field were determined by the computer's ability to render the pixel grid, a two-dimensional projection of a three-dimensional scene. The Adobe Illustrator stroke weight tool allowed me to highlight the intricate layering of solid and dashed lines as I map pixel granularity. By toggling between micro and macro perspectives, I engaged with and pushed against the limitations of digital representation, reflecting on how these constraints shape my understanding of complex biological systems. I played optically as I drew, by regularly zooming in and out of the illuminated image on screen. The drawings I were creating were challenging and laborious to produce, yet my activity emerged from calculated play within the borders of the visual intellectual game I set myself. I was immersed in my world of creativity as I mapped pixels to construct a drawing. I recognized drawing was a way to express my creative approach as I studied the dynamic form of a whole radiolarium. I employed a range of graphical linear drawing techniques, including copying, layering, opacity, rotation, offset, and repetition. The reflective process, examining micro and macro perspectives on the computer screen, initially overwhelmed me, and the information, a common feature of every digital drawing I made, is this overwhelmingness. However, as I progressed, my strategy crystallized, guiding my decisions about what to map and what to omit. The resulting works invite viewers to see scientific data not as a fixed truth, but as a space for interpretation and imagination. Layering plays an important part in perception, creating a subtle description. Oh, sorry. This drawing, I sort of like offset slightly, and I'm very interested in how our eye perceives things and how you can offset very slightly sort of layers of copied image so that the perception, it creates a subtle disruption. And I'm interested in that idea of, because it's akin to holographic stereo images, but they're crafted by hand rather than by software. and it reflects my engagement with the complexity of representation. So I am asking myself all the time, what is the value of this very slow and laborious method of drawing? I am constantly questioning why I am copying computer-generated image data and what is the value of copying. I suppose what I am describing is the tension that gives the work its meaning. The value is not located in accuracy, originality, or even in the image itself. It lies in the act of sustained attention. Copying, in this sense, is a misleading word. Copying suggests duplication, obedience, or secondary status. But drawing, even when derived from an existing image, is never neutral transcription. The moment time enters the process, especially slow time, the image changes. The mouse tool hovers, decisions accumulate, perception sharpens, and fails to equal measure. What emerges is not a copy, but a record of looking. The drawing becomes evidence of duration, pixels becoming no-fill vector squares are amalgamated by Pathfinder, becoming light and shade. And this translation is crucial. A digital image is instantaneous, frictionless, endlessly reproducible. Drawing resists that speed. By rebuilding the image pixel by pixel, I expose evidence of construction. The drawings reveal what the digital image hides, that vision itself is assembled, partial, and unstable. The labor is not redundant, it makes visible the distance between seeing and knowing. Scientists involved in these projects described how artistic collaboration encouraged them to view data differently, embracing curiosity and experimentation. Our exchanges reframed lab work as a creative process, one where playfulness can lead to genuine discovery. Ultimately, this research demonstrates that advancing imaging technologies, when approached playfully, become instruments not just for observation, but of imagination. Through play, both art and science rediscover the invisible structures of life and the creative networks that connect us. And this is a quote from one of my collaborators, Fernandez Rodriguez, who said, "Having an artist like Joanne conduct research in a core facility lab can profoundly influence scientific work by introducing a creative and exploratory mindset that challenges conventional approaches. Working with an artist encouraged me to think, rethink my methodologies, embrace experimentation and playfulness as part of the scientific process. Their ability, artists' ability to reimagine data visualization and interpret biological process through innovative artistic perspectives significantly enriched my approach to microscopy and imaging. And this collaboration cultivated a sense of curiosity and adaptability, enabling me to view scientific challenges as opportunities for creative problem solving. Ultimately, this interdisciplinary exchange reinforced my belief in the value of integrating art and science and fostering a more dynamic research approach. So I'm just going to very briefly say what I'm doing next. So my future research is going back to the Natural History Museum, and I'm going to image some historic plankton alongside some newly collected specimens from the Atlantic Ocean. And this work will extend the framework developed through this research as I continue to explore invisible biological worlds. I'm also part of this project called Dialogue, Understanding Disorganization, a language-focused global initiative on psychosis. And it's funded by the Wellcome Trust, and it involves a lot of different psychiatrists from all parts of the world. And it's completely different to the work that I've been doing with other scientists. And a lot of the data that I'm getting is from transcripts from patients who have psychosis, and it's all about their disorganized thought and how they communicate in a disorganized manner. So I'm being given paragraphs of information that people have recorded from people with psychosis, and I haven't really started this research yet, but this is what I'm doing next. Oh. And I think that's it. Thank you.
If there aren't any burning questions, I think we'll move on to the next speakers, if that's all right. Great, thank you for that, Joanne. And to introduce our final presenters, Ellen Iborg and Christian Petersen. So Ellen Iborg is an architect, performance maker and researcher from Copenhagen, based between London and Norwich. She trained at the Royal Danish Academy and Goldsmiths and has worked at practices including Foster & Partners and Ab Rogers Design. She is a PhD candidate at the Bartlett, where her research develops methodologies through her practice, P-Arc Agency. And then Christian Petersen is a visual communication designer, researcher and illustration lecturer at Norwich University of the Arts, where he is currently undertaking a practice PhD on post-studio design practices. Christian's research interests include design, ethnography, critical design, visual communication, and design prototyping. And their presentation is entitled Spatial Ecology, so I'll hand you over.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation to the drawing room, and thank you for the introduction. So we're going to talk about spatial ecologies. As mentioned, my name is Christian. I'm a lecturer at Norwich University of the Arts, where I'm also a PhD student. And this is Elin, who's, like mentioned, is an architect and performance maker, as well as a researcher. And we've come to tell you about this project, Spatial Ecologies, that is made up, so it's a project, and it's sort of so far made up of 2 summer schools and a lot of associated activities. And we have like quite a lot of our summer schools participants with us in the audience here, and one of our collaborators, Gustav Balbela, who was part of the first summer school. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly do a little bit of setup and provide a little bit of context about the project overall, and as well as the first summer school. And then I'm going to hand over to Elin, who's going to talk specifically about the latest summer school, which took place in September last year, where a lot of the people that you see in the space today took part. What's important for me to acknowledge up front is that this project was only possible through the generous sponsorship and facilitation of the Broads National Park in Norfolk, as well as the RS, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, who supplied accommodation for us on site at the Ash Tree Farm, which is their little sort of base camp in the middle of the Norfolk Broads, which is otherwise quite inaccessible. There's not really any public roads leading there. You can only get there by train, and you can only get there by a train that sort of, under normal circumstances, probably wouldn't stop there if it wasn't like inscribed in UK law that it needs to
do so. The conductor on the way there even said, like, I've never had so many people get up at this stop ever. So, so that was, so their base camp for a couple of days became our base camp. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And finally, Harne Müller, who's a German fine arts paper company, supplied a lot of the materials that we used in the workshop. And finally, the summer school itself is hosted by the Interior and Architecture program at Norwich University of the Arts. And the paper that Harne Müller supplies, as you'll see for the second iteration of the summer school, becomes very much the protagonist of that particular summer school. I think it's important to highlight these partnerships because it in a way, they kind of signal a lot of what this project is really about. It's about working between disciplines, it's about collaboration, it's about working between institutions, and it's about like the relationship between the field and the studio space. It's a little bit, it's so fiddly. So these were our aims for the project overall, and these two aims are kind of where both my research interest, Elin's research interest, Gustavo's, and also Kirsty Badenmark, who's not here today, where our interests as PhD researchers converge. So it's sort of a project that sits between a lot of different PhD projects. This is the image from the, so maybe I just need to dwell on that. Okay, that would be great. Yeah, so the two sort of aims for this project is to field test collaborative, embodied, and situated image making, and it's bringing practice outside of conventional studio contexts. So I don't know how much, so I could speak to this a little bit more, but maybe that's something we'll take in conversation. I've seen so many interesting parallels and overlaps between what we've seen before, and maybe it's better left to the conversation to sort of discuss these in a little bit more detail. If you could. This is an image from the first of the two summer schools. So this is from Spatial Ecologies 2024, which was like the pilot course. This is, this took place, this image is from Holme next to Sea, which is in North Norfolk. It's also a quite remote place. What you see, what we did here for this particular workshop, that becomes important because this is very much what the next summer school that Elin will discuss builds on. What we did for this summer school, me and Gustavo and Elin, we went to the site together with a group of participants. We tested different choreographic, different sort of, we devised different tools to sort of enable sort of what you might call like an experimental site survey of the site. This particular image is from a collaborative way of sort of doing this experimental site survey. It's a collaborative performance led by Elin and Kirsty Badenmark. And this kind of, do you want to attach some words to that maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the sites that we use for the summer schools are specifically sites that are, you could say, there's an urgency. So this was Holme next to Sea, which is up close to the wash that are affected by the longshore movements. And if you've heard in the news, the coastal erosion of the Norfolk coastline is quite pressing, and you see it a lot happening. You can see it sort of day by day, the changes. So we used this specific site, this sea henge that was found in the 90s, that became, from the Bronze Age, that became our device to sort of discuss these sites. So the site in each of the summer school is the protagonist. We interrogate the site, the project through the site, and not the other way around.
yeah, so just to pick up on again. So this, what this particular project taught us, I'll come to in a moment. But yeah, if you could change the slide. So how we do it, how we did the work on site. We did these explorations alongside our participants, sort of in a very open, sort of explorative way. A lot of the work that we did after was kind of trying to make sense also collectively of like what the outcomes of these kind of workshops are, like what is it in fact we have done through our collaborative experimentation. And this happened with the first summer school through exhibition and a seminar that was held right after, but also it helped through symposia that was held within the architectural department that broadened out the discussion, and also me and Gustavo and Elin co-published, co-authored a paper that's a preprint article, Spatial Ecologies Devising Ecological Performance and Image Making, which is forthcoming in that publication. And for us, this second iteration of the summer school, the Spatial Ecologies 2005, this is the first instance where we're bringing what we found, the things that we did, to a wider audience, where we bring it outside like the smaller circle that was our participants and people within the people directly involved in it. So we really look forward to this and really hope for a really productive conversation about that. So what we learned from that and what came out of that paper that me and Gustavo and Elin authored was, and the most important thing that we took forward into this next iteration was, there was kind of, we did stuff on site. We engaged with the site in different ways through the experimental site survey and so on and so forth. Then the idea was to sort of document those experiences in a collaborative, large format drawing. And this is, so you see here on the left-hand side, you see the performance and some of the sort of individual projects that the students brought on site. Here it's kind of an illustration student that displaces the studio in a sense and takes this mini studio on site to conduct her work there. This is kind of what happened on site, and then we went back into Boardman House here at Norwich, and here you see the students engage, the participants engaging this like collaborative image making, this collaborative sense making. What we found is that this kind of separation of the two, what happened when our participants came back in sort of the institution, it's almost like, in a weird way, the school or the institution or the studio might say, started to sort of reassert itself in very interesting ways. It's sort of, it's almost like as the disciplinary identities that sort of fell away in the field, they came back almost twice as strong within the studio. And for us, there was like that sort of was something that we didn't quite understand, and it was something that we really wanted to sort of undo in a sense. And so the next, for the next summer school, a big exercise was bringing these two sides together somehow. And this is kind of the premise for the next summer school to a large extent. And this is a quote from Bruno Latour, and it also really came to guide that effort of doing the practice in a way where these disciplinary identities didn't assert themselves in the same way. And what he says here is, for hundreds of years after the invention of perspective drawing, 300 years after projective geometry, 50 years after the development of CAD screen, we are still utterly unable to draw together. So that became our mission, in a sense, to draw together. Yeah. And yeah, this is just, and where we found the most potential for that was in that performance that I showed you, the collective performance that Elin and Kirsty initiated on site. That's where we saw the most potential, this collaborative performance where, a communal bodily enactment became an interface between the participants and the environment. And this is what we really wanted to explore in the next summer school. So just a shout out to our participants here. Again, many of them are in the space, and also to our key collaborators, Andrew, James, Jonathan, Geraldine, Phil, Sam, and Kirsty, of course. Just because Kirsty isn't here, we thought we would just like show her a piece of her work here. So Kirsty is herself an artist, an architect, and she's a researcher, and she's researching a PhD at the Bartlett as well. And this is a good sort of illustration of her practice. It's about engaging with environments. It's through thinking about mark making in other ways and how the landscape becomes a collaborator in the drawing process. This is us with Will, with Andrew from the Broads Authority, and this is the site that we were working on, Halbergate Marshes, again, one of the most climate vulnerable sites in the UK. And this is where we went, and you see Burney Arms windmill down there, and the red dot is the farm itself, and you see the railway line going through the landscape there. And you can even see at this stage how, like, pregnant with like water bodies and like dikes and channels the space is. And this is what it'll look like in 50 to 70 years. Again, like a heat map just showing how much of this area will be underwater in the immediate future. So this drawing project, what we really want to do is make a drawing that kind of documented these spaces in a collaborative way. This is the route that we took our participants on. You can see again Burney Arms, you can see along the Braden shoreline and so on and so forth. Just in the interest of time, I'll move on quickly. Elin will talk a lot more about that. Yeah. So Elin is now now I've sort of done a little bit of the setup for you guys, and then now Elin will sort of take you into Halbergate Marshes and Braden Water and detail what we did there. Yeah.
Thank you. We were really interested in this site because it's an interesting entanglement between human-made peat extraction, how the site is actually developed, and the sort of ecological pressures, and also the interesting ecological things that are growing in the site that might also be because of the changes that are happening. So it's a very complex site, it's a very flat site, and there are just a few routes you can take through the site that we then decided were going to be sort of giving us the premise of the performance. So Hanne Mulle gave us a 12-meter paper, watercolor paper, and we took that along with white boiler suits, as you can see. So when we came to Ash Tree Farm, which was our greenhouse or our hub, we started preparing for this mission of walking this 12 kilometer long journey. We weren't just going to walk, we were going to do a performative act, a task that at first seemed a bit absurd. It was about carrying this 12-meter paper through this 12-kilometer journey. And how many students were we? 12 students that were carrying this paper through the marshes. So the task was to handle this piece of paper, but also to allow for any traces, any, you could say, obstacle that came along the way, animals, water, dikes, birds, mud, that would begin to form how we interacted with the paper, but also our immediate responses to how we worked as a team against also wind and how we communicated, how we had conversations across. So the preparation was quite important, and in any kind of performative piece, preparation about going on a mission also makes you anticipate what's going to happen. So we took it as a mission to carry this paper. And then we started walking along the Defence Embankment, and we, you can see it here. So we sort of started to create these gestures, approaches to handling the paper, both through voice, how we would signal that a gate was approaching, or a cow or cattle was nearby, that we needed to then turn the paper in a certain way to then accommodate that, or to minimize our impact, or our visual impact, to not scare them off. And then sometimes it became also a windshield for more exposed areas. So it took form both of a mark, or creating traces, or picking up the traces from the side, and a sort of protector, a shelter, and we even used it as a picnic blanket for our lunch. And the interesting thing that happened through this process was, I remember one, I think it was Swithin, who was sitting here in the audience, was explaining afterwards that they weren't even noticing the act of drawing or performance until it was drawn. So this kind of shifted acknowledgement or consciousness about what we were actually doing was quite curious for us, because we thought, could we bring some of the same attitudes back into the studio, where we're not sort of uber conscious about what we do before we do it, but we create tasks that might be quite demanding, that in this case we were offered the wind, we were offered the mud, we were offered the gates and the cows and the water and the dikes, that gave us resistance, so we didn't notice. We were only observing things that happened in the aftermath, that we then maybe celebrated or tried to capture through photos and filming as well, but also through conversation, and how we would dwell in the moments through this 12-kilometer journey. So you can just flip through, actually. Yes, so this is some of the images from the journey. Yeah. And these little moments that happened along the way, where we called them these temporary visitors of the drawing that wouldn't last there, and we couldn't stick them down with tape. That was not part of the dogma. So they became just visitors that we enjoyed while they were there. And then we came back to this is Ash Tree Farm, where we then laid, it's not in this photo, but we laid out the drawing, and we collectively discussed what the experience was like, and we were extremely tired. And there's also something about putting yourself, we were talking about reenactment before, but putting yourself in a position of hard work, laborious work, where you, in a way, you slip out of your sort of conscious body image way of working, where it's so hard that you can only think of a few things at the same time, that makes you sort of notice other things in the process. The next day, we had a different attitude to the site through sound, where Jonathan Watts, artist and sound artist, and does other things as well, was helping us use various recording techniques to record other visible layers of the site. For instance, photosynthesis and metal and timber that we sort of recorded into, and some of the students, participants, made a sound recording from that. And then the next day we had pieces of the paper left, because we actually had 2 rolls of paper. And what was interesting was also observing how the unconscious performance that came out of the first task of dragging a piece of paper through a site then spurred on to some more choreographed initiatives from the participants of going down into the embankment and actually using the paper as a demanding prop, you could say, for these various interactions with the site and the paper. So it formed these vignettes, performance vignettes along the embankment that also became these sculptural markers. But it was interesting to see, also for myself as a performance maker, how do you guide people in that might not use performance as practice in their practice into a way of thinking of an embodied practice? How do you give also agency, and which is something that I think we talked a lot about, is how in a very simple act as this paper act, or this paper task that we did, could allow for various interpretations and ways into this. So we had fine art students, illustrators, and architects and photographers that might not use performance as a practice, but saw ways of thinking about sight, about representation through performance. That was very interesting to see how emerged. And then we came back to the studio, and this is really where not the problems, but the questions, I would say, and also maybe questions about studio practice started to emerge. Because how do you take a piece of paper that is actually nothing in itself? It's a paper with some mud traces. It exists with the temporary visitors in a different way than it exists as a still object in the studio. So how do we begin to reanimate this piece of paper in the studio with the same maybe attitude of the field, the attitude of the field being this unconscious body schematic way of treating the drawing. So how do we treat it with the same impulse in a static space where we don't have the wind or the mud or the birds? Or so this became really a discussion, and what emerged was were these performative interactions that was very caring, very sort of also maybe celebrating what had happened in the field in a way. But this is a discussion that we are asking ourselves. How do you bring back your field studies back into the studio? Yeah. So performatively, there was some interesting kind of configurations that happened in the space that just started to emerge. Yeah. And then we were part of an exhibition, and this is also something that the summer school platform in itself, you could say, opens up this idea of tapping in, that the summer school is not. It sort of sits, it's hosted by Norwich University of the Arts, but it's heavily created or made possible from the collaborations that are also external. It asks questions that are not part of the syllabus necessarily, but uses the opportunity of being very close to Norfolk Broads. And in this case, we tapped into an exhibition that was already happening that seemed fitting for the discussions we were asking with the project. So When It's Gone, It's Gone, curated by Matthew Bennington, Rhoda Sue and Katie Hammond. And it was exhibited in an old shoe factory in Norwich. So we were able to set this up there. And yeah, so this was sort of the installation of the paper afterwards, and the boiler suits. And then Caitlin Fraser, who's here somewhere, yeah, sitting on the back, edited the footage on the wall there. And the other students within, I know, was in the sound group who did the soundtrack, so you can't see it here, but there was a very beautiful soundtrack as well from the recordings. And then we had David and others who did the photos, and we had obviously the great performers who were doing an event in the space. So it became this constellation between the paper, the aftermath, the photos that myself and James Hepper, who was another collaborator, external collaborator, where we just took all the photos. And photography, I find it's also in my own practice, how we document performance is a very interesting conversation, that it isn't just documentation or representation. Now we're questioning representation, it is cause as well, but how photography can be used in a way that begins to interweave with the drawing, like capturing these temporal visitors on the drawing becomes the only way that we can actually sort of remember them, or through conversation, and also filming, where you film, like you have a lot of footage left when you're done, maybe more than you need, and the task is really the editing process. So it also became this, we had this array of materials that the participants could go in and use and look through and create narratives of. So the film was one of many, and there could be a lot of sequences of these films that could tell different stories. And it was sort of using montage as a technique to juxtapose some of the experiences that we had inside. And then the performative element of the exhibition, again, another attitude to the drawing, where there was an audience, an event, and it became more ritualistic in a way, celebrating this piece of paper as a protagonist, now not as a protagonist that demanded to be handled through the marshes, but now as a sort of thing in a space. And the boiler suits that were an extension of the drawing, you could say, and the traces of the drawing. And then we could, as the last thing, show the 1 minute, 2 minutes film. So maybe as the last note about collaborative drawing, to end on that, it was interesting to see how you can form an ensemble around a drawing practice. And this is something we would very much like to take forward. How do you create collaborative drawings? How do you set it up, basically? So... Do you want to add?
Oh, I think let's leave it there. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. If the rest of the presenters can join me in the seats. Great, so we'll have a quick discussion, but also we're really wanting to hear from the audience as well, so please feel free to put your hands up for questions. Firstly, thank you so much for your really thoughtful and intentional presentations of each of your research. It's really inspiring to see and really interesting to hear. I think what was interesting in all of the research from each of you is that there is a real ebb of collaboration, kind of whether it's present throughout or present in different stages. And I think it would be really great to hear how you value collaboration as part of your research, your artistic practices, and your drawing in general. So anyone can feel free to jump in.
I kind of feel like collaboration is so important. I don't think about it often. Like I remember reading when I was younger this book called Art Worlds, and it's about trying to argue that you can't make a piece of art alone, but there's the person who, beyond like an atelier or something like that, the person who makes the pencils or the paper in your instance is also, you know, an artist who collaborates on the piece of work. And I don't know, I come perhaps more from like a research or an architecture background in which, you know, you can't make a building on your own really. I mean, you can, but it's very, 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 very rare. But, you know, there's like the things that make the stone that, and the people who lay the bricks and the mortar, and I know I always kind of think through that and like how you can cite someone in a research paper who's told you a story or, you know, has given you like an anecdote or a plant, and you know, it's kind of it's almost like everything. You know, I can't think of like not thinking about collaboration almost. It's just like the atmosphere that I know one tries to breathe making work.
I really like working on my own work, but I absolutely love working with people from different disciplines. And I teach, so I do lots of like collaboration with students and, you know, like working as part of a team. But the most enjoyable thing for me working with people is from different disciplines and trying to navigate that and trying to understand how somebody thinks from a very different discipline about the subject matter that they're doing. So that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, in relation to that, in my research, I work with a concept that I call touch points. These points where different worlds collide and somehow open up new questions, new agencies, new ways of seeing things, for observing things, and doing things. So I also really thrive in environments where everything is not aligned and there's a bit of clashes and things that don't really make sense. And I guess that's why the tasks then become quite interesting. Like the complexity of something, like if it is in the unknown, there is a tendency to overcomplicate like these kind of participatory engagement often, especially in the architecture world, where I come from, where it's sort of translated through language or through things that might be hard to interpret. And there might be methods that are sort of to simplify engagement and participation that opens up for the complexity of these potential touch points between people.
It was really interesting to see yours, Matt, where you brought these people that lived these histories, and like and brought them into the collaboration of creating these banners. It's like something that seemed in a so effortless way. And coming up with these like super beautiful, highly sophisticated artifacts at the end of it. That was extremely inspiring. I think it also speaks to an attitude around collaboration that I'm really, really a champion for. And this is this idea that, you know, we didn't speak to it in great length, but this idea of like, you know, climate crisis, ecological collapse, these things that are sort of, if we don't leave the studio and engage with these kind of the communities that are affected and the spaces that are being lost, if we don't leave our studios to engage with those, we will be forced to leave them eventually. And what I've seen in my research is like collaboration is one of those ways of replicating some of the things that you get in a studio. Like, I'm not exactly sure how, but the studio supports our work in certain ways. And, you know, it's when we go into the field, we lose a lot of that. But it's through collaboration that practicing outside studio context to me becomes possible. And that was something I was maybe, I don't know, maybe it's throwing it back to you, or maybe you have another question, I don't know.
No, I think all of those are such interesting points. And I think to pick up on that as well, kind of talking about this outside of the studio context, it would be interesting to hear about all of your own relationships kind of to the studio and outside of the studio, and where you feel like your research and your drawing and kind of all of your creative and artistic outputs exist. And it kind of doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional artist studio. It could be like architectural institutions, kind of things that represent this kind of inside studio space to you all.
I'm very interested in tapping in, as I said before, to spaces that are maybe in an architectural practice that are still sort of part of the practice, but maybe not used in the way, in the sort of sequence, in the chronology. So, for instance, I've been working with something I call construction site performances, where in my work as an architect, going into these construction sites and turning them into performance venues. So using the time-lapse cameras as that are used normally to film the building emerge and capturing that, compressing that imagery to actually film the bodies on site through various paces. And then I was using dance technique from Buto dance to walk ultra slow for the cameras, so appearing normal for the cameras and then clashing with the other movements of the bodies. So this way of maybe creating a détournement on a space that is highly regulated and making it into a performative space is something I'm quite interested in. And when I was working at Foster's, I would use the lunch breaks in an immediate context to Battersea riverbed to practice tide performances there. So my performative practice is very much linked to finding these cracks in time and spaces where performances as sketches, I guess, of ideas can emerge in a very sort of low impact way, in a way, actually. Sort of tapping into these spaces that I already have access to, but building something from that. So that's my experience.
I think reflecting on studios, I like have many migrating studios, I feel, at once. No, I don't rent that many spaces, but like where I work, we have like an office, but there's always like so many points of like going to places and meeting people and drawing, and there's in this project there's so many tables that were like joined to another table and a stool and had something laying over them that became a studio, and almost became a studio through like the ceremonies we had of kind of approaching like a piece of work with intent and having tea. Like I like the moment in your presentation when you talk about using it as a picnic blanket, this huge drawing, and almost like putting this piece of paper or fabric on the ground and somehow creating a delineation that will eat or make it into a studio or make this box, that you make this kind of space to make something and share. And I think there's like lots and lots of moments of that, of just being in someone's living room and interviewing them about lead mining, and they like will like take a book out, but they have to like unfurl this like table mat first and kind of prepare this kind of studio to present something to me. And I think often about like these small acts of kind of ceremony and preparation, and kind of making a studio like on the move or migrating around different sites and places and people. And yeah, these kind of moments where you kind of gradation, maybe like a threshold of moving into a studio or out. I don't know kind of where it stops, but I think there's many, and yeah, they're always changing and are weird and wonderful in many different ways.
I really like going into scientific labs because I think they're really creative places. They are a studio, but they're not a studio that we maybe recognise in an art space, but they are. They're sort of really interested in process, and I'm really interested in process and how things are developed. So going into a scientific lab and seeing all the different instruments, seeing the steam come out of different machines, opening a fridge and you get cold ice, and I think, and like how they measure like sort of medicines and things, and very accurately, I think it's absolutely fascinating. When I first started to work with scientists, I went to Nottingham and I approached lots of different places. And I went to Nottingham, and I went to the top floor of a like very boring 60s building, and I waited outside, and this lady, this secretary, was there, and she said, "Just wait for the dean and sit down." And she was in a suit, and she had an American tan types. I thought, I'm going to go into this office, and I'm going to meet the dean, and I'm going to try and explain that I want to come and work with them. And I opened the door, and the guy who was the dean had an art studio in his office. And my mouth hit the floor, and I was amazed because he had 70s vases, Jackson Pollock paintings that he was making, and he was a part-time artist. And that, and the way that that institution, through his interest in art, sort of fed into all the medical students' like interest in making art, doing things that were creative, like sort of like was so exciting that it's sort of, again, those like shifts in how you view practice and what people do as practitioners. So I love scientific labs. I like working in an art studio. I like working on my computer. There are many spaces that I can navigate to enjoy working within a creative space. And I think that's really good, to be very adaptable wherever you work and whatever you do.
No, I agree. And I think, yeah, that point of adaptability, all of your answers are kind of really speaking to that adaptable nature. And like you said, Jan, it's important to think about actually what are the broader definitions of what a studio could be, you know? So I think in the interest of time, I'm wanting to open it up to the audience. If anyone had any questions for any of our presenters, feel free to just stick up your hands and I'll come over.
I wanted to ask specifically about how the quilts were made a bit more, because especially if you're involving collaborations with people that aren't art makers, but they're these really beautiful artifacts. So I was just wondering a bit more about the practicalities. But then also I wanted to ask everyone how we can kind of encourage cross-departmental research, because there is this really big divide between arts and science. So how you've managed to kind of combat that and get people to take art practices more seriously as well.
On the quilts quickly, I think in terms of how they were made, it was much more me being told how to make a quilt than anything in the other direction of the people in the village of Long made their own clothes and repaired things, and there's kind of a paucity of finances that meant that every piece of clothing had to be darned and restitched, and there was such like an incredible wealth of fabric and banner making, despite not having a banner for 40 years. People were like amazing sewers and quilters and printers and dyers, and the quilting became very easy. It was like, I don't know, it felt incredibly natural. It felt like drawing to be around like people so experienced in like making fabric. We discussed like, oh, we could have like this border of like, you know, different purple squares, and we like cut out like some quick examples, and at Blankton there was like a quilt already made, and we like would try almost like a collage of, you know, testing like kind of block formations, and we like stitch them into like a kind of rough small example, and then unpick them and add things, and then attach paper on top with like double-sided tape and that kind of thing. Almost like a really big collage in the end, and then we would like print and redraw and draw on top of for the final quilts based off those kind of small maquettes. And there's somewhere in the presentation of the hands of people adding stickers and that kind of thing. Who wants to start on the second?
I was just thinking of an example from what you were saying about attention spans in the laboratory, and entering that space as an artist. There's a department at the Bartlett led by Marcus Cruz called BioID, which is basically half of the students are biologists and half of the students are artists and architects. And I think there is something about attention spans and about, of course, if we do projects together, we need to have a similar vision of something. But also there is also a tendency that the intention, in a way, the outcome becomes the similar vision, and we forget the process of discovery and letting that sort of lead the way, in a way. So how do you set up a space, an ecology, a setup of bodies and people and various attention spans and various ways of going in depth with something, of handling a material in the same space, where they can begin to converge or maybe learn from each other, rub off each other. So what was in BioID very interesting was that the scientists, they were waiting for a month maybe for a result, and that waiting time was sort of part of their sort of process. So there was another timing in Isaac's work in a different pace, produce, there's a different kind of output, but they could sort of tap into that output and use that in their sort of anticipation of the experiment they were doing. So there was an interesting overlap there. So it's just a case study where I've seen that there's something quite interesting emerging, not from a ready-made idea of an intention, but through a setup. But I think it's a very important question how we can create these spaces for collaboration. I don't know if there's a simple answer to that.
I think it's really, really hard to have the privilege actually to go into a scientific space and work with scientists. And I think, I even since COVID, I think there's sort of like possibly more limitations in doing that, in working with like maybe biomedical scientists. I think that there is a network of people who work in similar fields like, say, advanced imaging and microscopy, who would be kind and maybe open doors, but it is really, really hard. And yeah, it's not. I find it really difficult to, even in my university, go into their labs. And I've had 3-year conversations with people, and it hasn't really gone anywhere yet. So it's a really complicated thing. I think artists should be embedded in labs, and scientists should be embedded in studios as well. There should be a much more fluidity between disciplines, but it's very difficult to navigate, I think. Does that answer your question?
So I think that one of those first slides I showed also speaks directly to that, like the difficulty within like institutional contexts of like creating a space for collaboration. because I was serious when I said that this project wouldn't have happened without those partners, and those were external to the institution. There wasn't like this. The summer school is something we do on our own steam. It's not part of like a curriculum, so it's not sort of. It sits between, or it falls between, like the sort of financial mechanisms in place for like doing delivery. So a lot of us do it for free and on time and like those kind of things. That said, I think, again, going back to this idea of like the subject matter we deal with, like the climate stuff, like there's a guy at KU Leuven, he's called Rolf Hughes, and he's like a professor of transdisciplinary studies, and he says like, you know, these problems, they don't obey like disciplinary boundaries. It's always going to be back to collaboration. It's going to be this, it needs to be this highly collaborative endeavor to sort of begin to sort of, in any meaningful way, from regardless of what discipline you're in, to sort of start to address these problems. So yeah, so I think I'm just saying what you're saying. It's really hard, but worthwhile, right? It's almost like the summer school happens in spite of the expectations that's put on us by our institution, not because of it. And that's not good, but it also gives us like an immense amount of freedom in doing it, in a sense. Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone? Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for those talks. It was really interesting. I had a question on spatial ecologies. You briefly mentioned kind of when you were re-entering the studio space, as it were, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, so please. The kind of restrictive nature of it, the more academic laden aspects of the behaviours that came in, and also the ways that you were trying to overcome that within the actual kind of interior space. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more? I'm interested in that kind of idea in my own studio practice.
That's a really good question, actually, because I think all of us felt that because it was such a large piece, and because we were so like in love with it, I think it was really hard to bring it back into the studio. And because it was sort of falling apart and it had all this sort of mud caked on it, and it was such a large piece as well, it took up the whole room. I think a lot of us felt like it was almost sort of taming a wild animal, I think, because it was so fitted into the space that we were working in the marshes. It felt almost cruel to have it inside, and so it was so important for all of us, particularly with performance, I think, to try and treat it like we did in the marshes, if that makes sense. And I think it was so important for us to sort of acknowledge that it was in this different environment as well, and how we can work off treating it like the piece that it was. Yeah. But it was definitely a shock, I think. I think a lot of us were really quite surprised when it was rolled out again, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Well, to wrap it up, since we are running behind time, I think my final question would be, it's really evident in all of the research kind of how drawing is interlinked with each of your presentations and your research outputs. But I would love to hear from all of you kind of what drawing means to you, whether it's personally or to your research, just like explicitly, yeah.
I find drawing for me is it's just like thinking, like remember drawing before it really did anything else. And I think like it's just a way to communicate and have kind of common language with people and to express what I think and note things down and kind of find space to like be myself. I often find I find like drawing is kind of everything. And it's really fun. And I was thinking about the question earlier about how to work with scientists and people from other kind of disciplines. And like, I've been in so many like other people's studios and workshops and labs, and everyone draws and makes notes and writes little, you know, diagrams and finds it fun. And I've always just found it kind of fun and essential, I think, to summarize.
I think it's the most important part of my practice. It is what I feel like it's the core, the fundamental core of everything that I do. And it's totally integral to who I am and what I think and how I behave as an artist. And I would be heartbroken to not have drawing as part of my practice.
Yeah, likewise. I see drawing as a performative practice, not only as performances enacted in space, but also paper and a pen. I've been collaborating with Peter Cook on filming him drawing, and sort of he has interesting ways of, for instance, erasing his pencil marks with an old razor blade. And I'm curious if these kind of very individual tactics that people have in their drawing practice, you talk about the endurance of your drawings, I would be so curious to see the process of it and actually the length of it. And I've seen you draw, that is also a long process, and I'm super curious about mannerisms and how people have their little individual mannerisms. So I like to observe that, but in my own practice, I am now starting these feedback loop drawings between motion capture, specifically around throwing practices, because we don't know how we throw, and it's one of the movements that we do schematically that we don't know how we do. So I'm interested in that, and then the modulation of the anticipated arc, and then the scatter pattern of the thrown objects, so the physical imprint. So I'm creating these feedback loops at the moment of those three components. I don't know what it will look like, but what I'm excited about is the different kind of modes of representation that each of those give. So
I'm going to make it really short, but I don't know really, actually, because it's changing a lot, and this is part of it. So I come from a sort of quite traditional graphic design illustration background, and I've done graphic novels for quite a long time. And I think when I say that, you can probably anticipate what that process is like. It's like a very kind of conventional illustration design process, but doing more and more of these research practices is kind of, or even like trying to figure out how my practice continue to be meaningful when trying to address these questions is kind of like really perplexing. So the things I'm doing now, I'm thinking a lot about field notes, but also how you could do those collaboratively maybe, and that's like a conundrum that sort of sits between disciplines. Anthropologists are thinking about it, some journalists are thinking about it, and now I'm thinking about it. And maybe that's a collaborative project for the future, understanding like these kind of, how do you reinvent yourself as an illustrator to work more collaboratively maybe? I don't know, yeah.
Thank you so much. Can we get another round of applause for our presenters, please? Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.